If you have ever tried to hire a freelance professional editor to work with you on a book, you may know that there are multiple types of editing. And so in this video, I'm going to break down the 4 main types of editing that you can get for a novel and explain to you exactly what they are and what you should expect from an editor doing this particular service. I will also mention some other types of editing and critiques that people sometimes charge for at the end of this video that are not covered in these main 4 categories of editing. So stick around if you are interested in finding out what those are. I am a self-published author and have hired editors to do each of these 4 different types of editing in the past, so I'll also include a little bit about my experiences and whether I think that they're really worth it. The first type of editing that we're going to talk about, developmental editing, focuses on the big picture of the work. And the last type of editing that we're going to talk about focuses on the very minute details of the work. The focus of each of them gets narrower as we go down the list. So if you were to get each of these types of editing done on a manuscript, this is the order that you would do them in, the order of the video. So the first type of editing that we're going to talk about today is called developmental editing. Developmental editing is focused on the big picture of your novel. A developmental editor is going to be focused on giving you feedback on your plot, your characters, your pacing, your theme, the general clarity of your ideas, what your story is about, and whether your book tells the story as effectively as it can. A developmental editor does not care if your commas are in the right place, if your grammar is correct. All they care about is your story and how you've put it together. So naturally, this type of editing is often the first type of editing that you get done on a book. Feedback from a developmental editor can lead to really big rewrites and rethinking of the work. So if you want to get a developmental editor to work with you on your story, you want to do that before you really spend much time digging into the prose, because everything might shift around after you have to revise it. You may want to consider getting a developmental editor if you are stuck on a particular element of your story, if you think that you're on the right track, but just something isn't sitting right with you, if you want to self-publish the book and you're feeling good about it, but just want to get another pair of eyes on it, if you want to query out to agents and you want to make the investment to strengthen your book by getting another pair of eyes on it to workshop it with you. If you haven't written very many books before and you want to improve your craft as a writer, I've worked with a developmental editor twice on 2 of my books. I worked with a developmental editor on the first 2 books of my 5-book series. I was starting a series and had never written a series before, and I really wanted to set the series up as effectively as I could, and that's why I worked with a developmental editor on book 1. And then with book 2, I'd never written a sequel to anything before, and so I worked with the developmental editor because I kept getting really stuck. And the feedback that I got from working with that developmental editor really helped put things into perspective for me and helped me write a sequel that I feel was even stronger than the first book. I chose not to work with one on the 3rd, 4th, and 5th books because at that point I knew the characters so well already and knew where I wanted to take the story that I didn't feel the need to work with a developmental editor. I spent close to $2,000 each time I worked with the developmental editor, and so it's a substantial investment up front, which is why I chose not to do that for the later books in the series once I already felt pretty confident in what I was going to write. But of all the different types of editing to invest in, I feel that the developmental edit is the most important one. As a reader, I will often overlook typos and small grammatical errors if the story is awesome and I'm really invested in the characters and in what's going on in the book. So if you aren't fully confident in your story, I highly recommend investing in a developmental edit, especially if you're going to self-publish your book, because a good developmental editor can really bring your book to the next level. The second type of editing is more specific than the developmental edit, and this is the line edit. While developmental editing is focused on the plot and the structure of the story, line editing is focused only on the prose. The job of a line editor is to improve the style, tone, word choice, and structure of your sentences and paragraphs. Line editing refines your writing to enhance the overall readability and coherence of your writing. A good line editor improves your style, your word choice, your tone, your sentence structure, your paragraph structure, fixes any awkward or clunky phrasing, smooths everything out, makes sure the tone is consistent, just to polish everything so it's easier to read. The line edit is much more involved than the next two types of editing that we're going to talk about. A line editor will go in and change things and move things around and offer suggestions for improvement, and they're going to focus on every single sentence and word choice in your book. I work with a line editor on every book that I publish. I've been working with my freelance line editor for 5 years now, and he has worked on every single book in the They Stay series, so he knows the characters really well, and he also does serve as somewhat of a developmental editor, pointing out issues that he finds when he reads the book, offering suggestions for ideas and things that could be improved. I couldn't recommend him highly enough. He is a fantastic editor, and I work on every single book that I write with him. So if you're interested in finding a really, really great line editor, I have linked his information in the description of this video. Usually a line editor will not be focused on the developmental element of your storytelling, but Perry is, and he's fantastic, so definitely check him out if you're looking for a line editor. Line editing usually comes after developmental editing, so if you choose not to pursue developmental editing, you would probably go straight to line editing. If you think of all the different tiers of editing as being on like an upside down triangle, you have like developmental editing at the top, then line editing, and then the more specific types of editing. So the next type of editing is copy editing. Copy editing is focused only on your spelling, grammar, and syntax. Just making sure that you are as accurate as possible and use the rules of the language as accurately as possible. Copy editing is a very detailed line-by-line check for grammar accuracy. It also checks for accuracy, making sure that all of your facts are true, like your place names are right, the consistency of your descriptions is right. So if you describe one character as having blue eyes, you don't describe them as having green eyes in the next chapter. Usually copy editors will work using one specific style guide, so either like the APA or the Chicago, or maybe a publisher will have their own specific style guide, or if you as a self-published author have your own style guide, you can send that to a copy editor and they'll work within that framework. A copy editor will not be trying to make any stylistic or structural changes to a book. They are only trying to make sure that the language used is accurate. Copy editing usually comes after line editing, because by the time that you want a copy editor, you've already worked on the prose to try and smooth it out and make it readable. So copy editing comes after, because that's going to be focused just on making it as accurate and correct as possible. And the fourth type of editing, which is the most specific type of editing, is proofreading. Proofreading focuses solely on correcting surface level errors. Any overlooked typos, spelling mistakes, punctuation mistakes, formatting problems. It's not really worried about grammar or syntax or accuracy or checking any facts. It's literally only focused on fixing any last-minute little errors like typos that could slip through into the final product. The goal of proofreading is just to make sure that the manuscript is as error-free as possible. And this is the last type of editing that is done to a book before it's published. So each of those types of edits really build on themselves, with developmental editing focusing on the large-scale edits and proofreading focused on the very small-scale edits. The scope starts wide and then narrows over time. Each one of these types of edits can run you a couple of $1,000s. Proofreading is the cheapest, usually charging maybe around $1,000. Depending on who you go with, you can find cheaper proofreaders and you can find more expensive proofreaders, with probably developmental and line editing as being the most costly because they take the most time. Logically speaking, if you had to spend $2,000 on 4 different editors to work on a book every single time you published it, that is an astronomically high upfront expense. I personally can't handle an $8,000 upfront charge for every single book that I publish. So I don't get each one of these types of editors for every book that I publish, but I always do get it professionally edited. So another type of editing that you may see advertised is what's called a manuscript assessment. This is also sometimes called an editorial assessment. And essentially what it is an editor will read through your book and kind of write like a 1-page edit letter just assessing the main parts of your book and giving you bigger picture feedback on the general character, pacing, conflict, and like identify some target areas for improvement. This is not going to be as in-depth as a developmental edit. However, it will be cheaper. This can be a great first step to get if you don't feel like you're ready for a developmental editor, but you want another like expert pair of eyes on the manuscript to highlight some ways that they think you could improve it. Getting a manuscript assessment could be a really great idea. Another way that you can get feedback, and this is not this is not a type of editor, but you can work with beta readers. Beta readers are readers who will read a rougher draft of your manuscript and provide feedback on the general structure, pacing, like things they liked, didn't like, and like answer questions that you pose to them. But it's a very informal relationship. They're not editors, they're not editing your book. They are just casual readers and fans of the book that will give you some feedback on things that they really enjoyed to better help you create a product that they ultimately will enjoy more. But because reading and what people like is extremely subjective, it is hard to work with just one or two beta readers. I highly recommend, if you choose to work with beta readers, working with at least as close to 10 as possible, if not more, just so that when you get feedback, you can start to look for similarities in the things that people are saying. And if you have one person say, let's say that they, I don't know, hated the relationship between two characters, or like hated one scene where they had a big fight, but everybody else said that they loved it, then you know you can probably keep the scene. But if every single one of them tells you that they hated a scene, then maybe you can listen and start to see that maybe that might not be the best thing to include. Some authors also have alpha readers take a look at their book. The alpha readers will read books when they're even messier than the beta readers, and will sometimes read like a chapter every couple of days, like as the author writes them, and will give feedback like as the author is writing to maybe help motivate somebody to finish a book, or just help in the first construction of a story. I have never done this. I've never found it helpful. I find it a lot easier for me to just work on my own until I'm ready for beta readers, but some people find alpha reading really helpful. Another type of more informal editing that you can get is a sensitivity read. This is a specific type of, let's say, beta reader that is focused primarily on making sure that your book does not have any harmful stereotypes or harmful language that people could find offensive. This can be helpful to get if you're writing about very sensitive subject matter, even just for peace of mind, to get somebody else's opinion on the way that you portray things, just to make sure it's as realistic as possible and it's not glamorizing anything or stereotyping anybody. It is by no means mandatory, but it is another service, and there are people who offer sensitivity reading if you are interested in getting that for a project you're working on. So obviously, in an ideal world, I would love to get all of these different types of editing, but as I mentioned before, it's expensive to do that, so I don't do that. I got developmental editing for the first 2 books in my series, and then I stopped. I get line editing on every single book that I publish because that is where I feel like I struggle the most. I'm usually pretty confident and happy with my plot construction because that's my favorite part of writing, and that's really what I love to do. But the actual prose itself sometimes it needs a little TLC. Who am I kidding? Always needs a little TLC. So I always work with a line editor. I find that typos are the bane of my existence. I am amazed by how many slip through. I have gotten professional copy editing and proofreading in the past because originally when I published They Stay, I read it through so many times, and I had my line editor read it through, and I had my friends and family read it through, and still I was getting some reviews telling me that like people loved the story, but there were just too many errors, and then it got distracting, and this was just driving me absolutely crazy because I couldn't figure out why, because I'd gotten it professionally copy edited and proofread, and I had all these people read it. But when I went through and I ran it through Grammarly, I found that there were a ton of like little errors that had slipped through and duplicate words. Like it would be, like Miles and me would be like Miles and me walked through the door, and there were just 2 ands. And I didn't pick that up when I was reading because my brain, I guess, just skipped over it, and everyone else's brains just skipped over it. but when you're reading it for the first time, it's more obvious. So Grammarly picks all of those up. So now, instead of doing a professional proofread, because it's so expensive and people are people and miss a lot of things all the time, I run my books through both ProWriting Aid and Grammarly after I read it through and my line editor reads it through. This has proven to be a pretty good method for catching little typos like that. ProWriting Aid, I had always run my books through ProWriting Aid and it never caught the duplicate words, but Grammarly catches the duplicate words. So now I make sure I run it through both programs every time I publish a book. I do find copy editing very helpful. I just don't always do it. I also, this is the same with proofreading. I find that very helpful. I just don't always do it. But if I'm gonna do one, I will probably invest in the copy editing and then use a software like Grammarly or ProWriting Aid to replace the proofreader. So if I'm feeling really good about the story, I will do always line editing as number one, and then sometimes copy editing as a number two if I want to. And if I'm feeling a little more unsure about the story, or if it's a book one in a proposed series or a planned series, I will do a developmental editor and talk to the developmental editor about my plans for the series just to make sure that that book one supports that series idea that I have. But with the past couple books that I've done, in the series and then also outside of the series, I have been working with beta readers, using beta reader feedback as developmental editing help to help guide me as I revise the book. I could make a whole separate video, and I probably will, about how to choose a good editor, because it can be very difficult to find a good editor, and finding a developmental editor who you really like and trust makes all of the difference with that developmental edit. If you don't have a good developmental editor, it's not worth paying for a developmental edit. But that's all I have for this video. I hope that it was helpful. If you have a second, I would be super grateful if you could like this video and also subscribe to my channel. My name is Claire Fraze, and I'm an award-winning author who makes videos sharing actionable writing tips that helps me make my own writing better. I'm the author of the paranormal thriller They Stay series, which follows a 16-year-old girl whose younger brother gets kidnapped by an evil necromancer, and she has to team up with her 3 friends to stop the guy before it's too late and save her brother. It's a horror Stranger Things type series that is 5 books long, and I had so much fun writing it. Have you ever worked with a professional editor? If so, what was your experience? I would love to hear from you in the comments, and I'm sure the other people watching would also like to hear from you. Let me know down in the comments if you have any questions about what it's like to work with a professional editor, or if you want any clarification on the differences between these types of editors. I would be more than happy to talk about it. I hope we have a fantastic week, everybody, and as always, happy writing.